Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis, of the Praise of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and Facebook, and support me on Subscribestar, Locals, and Buy Me a Coffee. So today's episode is the 112th casual stream, To Attack a Mind, Musings on Psychological Warfare. So just before I get started, just let some people trickle in. One of the things I'm tying together a lot of things here for those who follow the channel. I talk about more recently, I had some videos on the nature of power, the nature of the mind, and metaphysics and psychology. And all of these sort of work together, fold together into this broader description of psychological warfare. Because when we say that, WW mind death that we're all living through, that's when we say we're involved in a psychological warfare operation, more or less. And that's sort of what memeing is and all this online stuff. So in the chat, we have Nicholas Jabari, a long-time viewer, first-time stream watcher. Well, hello. Glad to have you here. I'm Middleton Walker and Rucker Deepness and GF. Hello. Okay, now we'll get started. And I think everybody can hear me. So here we go. While a broader treatment of psychological warfare is in the works, tonight's discussion will focus on the duel of minds. One man against one man, or one man against many men. We will begin by defining what a mind is, war is, and psychological warfare is. From these definitions, we will draw principles of action. From these principles of action, we will formulate scenarios to demonstrate techniques. The mind, as I have defined it elsewhere, is indubitable, indivisible, and incorrigible. The prefix "in" means not, meaning the mind is not doubtable, cuttable, or the contents of some other mind than your own. As this is not a philosophical exposition, exploration of these elements will be limited. Descartes showed in his Cogito ergo sum that to be deceived presupposes that one has a will or mind to be deceived. The mind is a unity that cannot be actually divided into parts. More on this later. While a man might be mistaken as to the cause of his pain, he cannot be mistaken as to the fact that he is in pain. For example, if lacerated, he knows he is in pain, but he might be mistaken on the cause of that pain. For example, the cause might have been an animal's claw or a saw blade. Furthermore, a man might feel guilt but not be able to ascertain where the source of this guilt comes from. In short, the mind is the unitary center of a man's will and consciousness, which just is and must be accounted for in the nature of things. For purposes of psychological warfare, the incorrigibility of sensation, specifically guilt and pain, is essential. Your target knows he is feeling guilt or pain. There is no doubt of that. The question is, what is the cause? In his helpless attempts to determine some underlying connection to your actions, a great deal of amusement can be achieved. Man is, as C.S. Lewis calls him, an amphibian. He lives in two worlds, the metaphysical and the material. The mind is that part of a man we all, in our own lives and the lives of others, that exists in that world that we have daily dealings with. The ancient dictum is that thought precedes action. James says in the book of James, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away from his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death." We see an action flowchart developed here. Through an act of the will, a man follows his own desires and draws away from God. In this drawing away, he loses direction. Imagine your mind as the pilot of a Japanese mecha, the mecha representing your body. In this case, the actions are guided by the unreasoning principles of desire. When the action sequence is initiated under the guiding principle of desire, the resultant action is sin. Sin is missing the mark. What this means is the action taken does not lead to the intended effect. The cumulative effect over time of life of missing the mark is destructive of social capital, material capital, and one's own body and soul in a word, death. If we abstract this description to a purely symbolic form, we have step 1, the slumbering of the intellect. Step 2, the drifting of the mind towards desire. Step 3, desire initiates an action sequence for some intended outcome. Step 4, the outcome is missed. Step 5, catastrophic failure. This basic structure can be reworked to describe actions taken under the influence of reason. Step 1, the necessary operations to preserve reasoning power is maintained. Step 2, guided by reason, the mind initiates action sequences. Step 3, the goal is achieved. And step 4, life is preserved. Having mapped out both kinds of mental to physical operations and the concomitant actions that follow from them, we shall look at these two operations as a thermodynamic system, missing the mark MTM and hitting the mark HTM respectively. MTM has an extra step, 5 rather than 4, that of moving away from reason. MTM has a bad EROI, as expending energy to achieve some goal and then miss result in a net energy loss, or in thermodynamic terms, an energy sink. An energy sink is defined as an energy source whose EROI is 1 to 1 or 1 to less than 1, and therefore unable to be used as an energy source. HTM has one fewer step, 4 instead of 5, which leads to a better action economy. Hitting one's target on net average over time yields positive EROIs, giving HTM superior thermodynamic performance. Action economy is the number of actions you can take in any given interval of time. Clearly, HTM, in having one less step and superior likelihood of achieving one's goal, has not only a superior EROI, but a superior action economy to MTM. Let's give a visual example. Imagine a samurai film with two men, one who is ruled by passion and anger and swings his sword wildly, cutting the air but doing little real harm. The other is calm, cool, and collected, analyzing every move before it happens, and then in one deft stroke lays his foe down. This is what, on a long enough time frame, the virtuous man will be able to do versus the wicked man. John Boyd attempted to describe the theory behind action with his OODA loop concept. OODA is an acronym for observe, orient, decide, and act. You observe your target and gather as much intelligence as you can on him to gather data from which a plan can be constructed. You orient when you have collected sufficient operational data, formulate a plan of action. You decide when, after formulating the plan, when and where to act. You act when you act. After seeing if your goal was achieved or not, you repeat this process over. In a fight, you want to prevent your enemy from being able to observe. This prevents him from even initiating the OODA loop. Having formally described the mind and the process of thought generating action, we shall now turn to war. Clausewitz, who defines war in a few ways, states, war is nothing but a duel on an extensive scale. If war is an act of force, it belongs necessarily also to feelings. If it does not originate in the feelings, it reacts more or less upon them. And the extent of this reaction depends not on the degree of civilization, but upon the importance and duration of the interests involved. War, therefore, is an act of violence attempted to compel our opponent to fulfill our will. Paul M. A. Weinbarger, in his Psychological Warfare, states, the fact that war is waged against minds, not bodies, of the enemy is attested by the comments of military writers of all periods. The dictum of Karl von Clausewitz, that war is politics continued by other means, is simply the modern expression of a truth recognized since antiquity. War is a kind of persuasion, uneconomical, dangerous, and unpleasant, but effective when all else fails. We define psychological warfare simply as this: the direct targeting of the opponent's mind without the intermediary step of the application of physical force. Thus, the difference between war and psychological war is not the intended goal, which is the same in both cases, but the means used to achieve that goal. One uses the direct application of physical force, the other uses non-physical methods. From these definitions, we can draw some conclusions. War is 100% mental. For whether it is the aggressor attacking you with physical force or the defender responding with physical force, one must first choose to act. The order must be given, the order must be followed, the treaty must be signed. From the Wrath of Aeneas, being the last thing on earth Turnus saw, or communist psychological warfare experts putting pressure on the U.S. civilian population, as well as the liberal decision-making process in the U.S. political order to initiate a withdrawal of U.S. forces from Vietnam, it is all about attacking the mind of the enemy. One must seek to exert force on the enemy mind to cause him to yield. Historically, this has been the use of physical force, which is direct and inefficient. In any war, the leader of the opposition is the last man to suffer for his deeds. I guess unless he dies in a battle, which we don't really see that much anymore. It would be much preferable to launch an attack directly on his mind. The principles of war can be reduced to a duel between two men. Many of the samurai masters in their writing intuitively understood this. Feelings are not the source of war, but the board on which the actions of war take place. This means that expected response levels can be partially determined and calculated by the expected result they will have on his feelings. The most direct and effective way to win a war or a duel is to directly attack the mind of one's enemy. How is this best to be achieved? Let's imagine a debate between two men, which is a mental duel, a form of war. Let us say that one man has a totally internally consistent view of the world and his place in it, and the other is filled with contradictions and gaps. Now envision a wedge being used to pry two things apart with the application of force. The goal in any debate is to find chinks and cracks in your opponent's position and place wedges in them. The goal then is to hammer those wedges until the pips squeak, as one British naval officer spoke of the Royal Navy blockade in World War I. When a man is forced to confront the contradictions and lies in his own life by repeated efforts to point out errors in his thought, or at the final end of this process, that he is totally ignorant of the workings of reality, is merely a cork floating along a vast sea of unknowable things full of fear and uncertainty, you have brought him to the point of total mental breakdown. This point of absolute fear of annihilation is the event horizon from which entry into the other side is commonly called PTSD. PTSD, in the modern usage of the word, was first observed in World War I with shell shock. A man under the pressure of bombs, shells, bullets, and gas had his entire mind shattered till he was a quivering mess. This was the product of the foreshock of sustained exposure to industrial war. Such men were shattered wrecks who had crossed the point of no return. Psychological warfare, as seen as a direct assault on another man's mind, finds its Clausewitzian expression of absolute war in the total destruction of the mind in a state of shell shock. For Clausewitz, absolute war is a hypothetical construction in which unlimited political and military force are used for some goal. The outcome of such a campaign would look much like Berlin in 1945. So will a man's mind. What does this theoretical absolute state of war look like? Imagine a man's mind where wedges have been placed at every chink and hole in his mental armor. Every contradiction, every lie, every perception has one of your wedges placed between them. And in the moment of heroic fury, you apply the force of 1,000 suns to these wedges in an attempt to crack his mind to pieces, like a planet being shattered in some sci-fi film using a superweapon. He is powerless to stop you. Your wedges hold, and his mind experiences the most exquisite kind of agony. As I stated before, the mind is a unity and cannot be divided into parts. But as Clausewitz stated in War, we play on his feelings. He is made to feel that his mind is being torn apart and will be shattered into pieces, flying through the ether. At that moment, he is totally at your mercy, with pain coursing through every fiber of his body. He cannot act. He is like a man paralyzed by an acupuncturist who places a needle at that one point in the nervous system to cause him to freeze. At this point, one of two things is possible. Complete absolute war is realized and the opposing mind is shattered. He is reduced to a quivering mass akin to a soldier suffering shell shock from World War I. Or, and this might even be more terrifying, as he is on the verge of slipping into oblivion, you stop. You walk away, you disappear. Brought to the highest pitch of pain and agony, his entire world reeling, he's still alive. Unable to process what just happened, he auto-deletes the entire experience and pretends it never happened. He knows fear subconsciously the fall of the other shoe. And with this sort of Damocles hanging over him, he will be constantly looking over his shoulder and wondering if the other shoe will fall. He was Turnus, looking into the eyes of Aeneas, and lived. Once you fine-tune this process, you can relive these lines from the Aeneid. In wrath, Aeneas cries, clad in his treasure, this trophy of a comrade, can you cherish hope that my hands will let you go now, Pallas? Pallas extracts his vengeance, and the blow is Pallas making sacrifice. He struck before he finished speaking. The blade went deep, and Turnus's limbs were cold in death. The spirit went with a moan indignant to the shadows. As often as you like. This feeling can be best described by reproducing a fragment of Screwtape's fifth letter to Wormwood. For the first time in your career, you have tasted that wine, which is the reward of all our labors, the anguish and bewilderment of a human soul, and then it has gone to your head. I can hardly blame you. I did not expect old heads on young shoulders. From the way C.S. Lewis writes about the torments of the human soul from the demonic perspective in such an artful and evocative way, one must conclude he on a couple of occasions indulged on that draft himself. Within the confines of confusion, pain, and suffering of the machine god, this is the highest pitch of ecstasy and satisfaction. All the stored up pride, arrogance, and self-assurance born of wealth, fame, and the lie is stripped away in a single act of conquest and absorbed into the victor. This is a symbolic representation of a Bronze Age warrior demonstrating prowess in battle and conquering his foe either in death or in captivity. To quote James again, you have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury, you have fattened your hearts as in the day of slaughter. You make this one feel as if he is on the day of slaughter and remind him that that day still awaits him in his future. You become an icon of doom, forever pointing to him his ultimate fate. This is why the left was and is so good at psychological warfare. They know how to attack the right and feast on the energy released from the mental anguish of this operation. Needless to say, a man will not willingly endure this treatment if he can help it. Either he will seek to leave your company or in some other way get rid of you. This state of mental warfare that reaches the state of absolute mental war is simultaneously absolute equality and absolute inequality. A man, no matter how much wealth, fame, political or physical power, book learning, or social success, will be powerless to stop that attack. Everything he is in his life will fade into nothing. He will be just an individual consciousness against you, another individual consciousness. But this equality is a prelude to something more terrifying, absolute inequality. He is reduced to such a state of powerlessness, anguish, and vulnerability. He is a child at the mercy of a ferocious beast or enraged warrior, and he knows it. This reality is seared into his mind, never to be forgotten. He knows that someone is superior to him regardless of all his trappings. This is closely related to the Rooster Cogburn principle. The complete utter subjugation of a man in this fashion is beyond exhilarating. It is a moment of transcendence where you both exist in a plane or a dimension where yin and yang have not yet arrived. And in that small space, everything is seen for what it is. In that glorious moment, he knows the score. Having described the fullest expression of psychological warfare in the form of absolute war, we must reason analytically to describe how one gets to this point. The first point is making your mind bulletproof. As this is a struggle of mind against mind, in the same way one describes an elite warrior before describing the missions and operations he is sent on, we must describe the elite mind. The elite mind is a result of decades of hard work. A medieval knight, before his training when he left a company of women around the age of 7 as a page, this process usually lasted until he was 14, and became a squire attached to a knight, which usually lasted until the age of 21, or later when he became a knight. Such focus and meticulous training is necessary for the elite mind. If we envision the mind as a brain attic filled with furnishings representing thought, then he must stock it only with those things he needs. These come in two basic kinds: universally necessary mental artifacts, UNMA, and dependently necessary mental artifacts, DNMA. In the case of UNMA, we are talking about those beliefs that all elite minds must possess in virtue of them being elite minds. These beliefs include accurate scientific knowledge of physical processes, accurate knowledge of the social sciences, which include history, economics, theology, philosophy, surprisingly to most, meekness. This last inclusion will need more explaining than the others, which are self-evident. If we return to Descartes' deceiving demon analogy, how is one able to determine truth from falsity? We need some way of seeing things as they are. In biblical Greek, meekness is often translated from the word praus, which means accurate self-knowledge. The key to every parry and strike is accurate self-knowledge. As Sun Tzu said, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Yet meekness not only speaks to self-knowledge, but a certain relationship to the good. One is meek precisely because one is oriented towards the good, which is God, as we see in the book of James, quote, we began this exercise with. As I have already at length elsewhere discussed the importance of mastery of science and social science in a practical sense, I will sum up this way. A man can form a mental image of the world as it is through careful study of all the disciplines, moving from the most abstract, which is theology and philosophy, to the most practical forms of applied physics, to build a strategic environmental model, or SEM, from which to act. Contrary to many postmodern doubters, a scientifically objective perspective can be reached in observations. This absolute superposition is best expressed poetically by Takewan Soho. Presumably, as a martial artist, I do not fight for gain or loss. I'm not concerned with strength or weakness. And neither advance a step nor retreat a step. The enemy does not see me. I do not see the enemy. Penetrating to a place where heaven and earth have not yet divided, where yin and yang have not arrived, I quickly and necessarily gain effect. It is necessary to possess UNMA to achieve this absolute superposition of action. DNMA is easier to explain. A man must have professions and interests which are as distinct as all the ages of the world. No one easily defined prescription of all practical professional knowledge can be given, as material conditions, religious conditions, and social conditions all determine the professions a man must have to provide for his own needs and others. DNMA is a general principle of what must be done in order to sustain the livelihood of the man and his dependents. The twin caveats being these professions must not interfere in any way with his maintenance of both mental and moral superiority as an elite mind, which are the foundations for his success in psychological warfare. The elite mind can go on both the offense and the defense, each of which will be discussed in turn. I've already spoke of placing wedges between the contradictions and lies within your opponent's mind and how to hammer them repeatedly. One might ask how one is to get into that situation. The first form of attack is the chameleon. The chameleon. When attempting the chameleon maneuver, one must be a careful observer of your intended target. Every man has a code he lives by, a philosophy, a religion, a set of principles. As Shakespeare says, the err is human. Men often fail to align with their stated values. Your goal in performing the chameleon maneuver is to be all smiles and handshakes. You want this guy to feel like he's your chum. You want to ask him about his values, beliefs, and principles. When asking him these questions, treat him as an intellectual equal. Firstly, this will flatter him, and secondly, will put him at ease and loosen his lips, as surely as any bottle of scotch will. Meanwhile, you are also studying the adepts and hierophants of his beliefs and learning them better than he does himself. Once you have exhausted what this man can tell you and know his own position better than he does, you get to the next step, which I call the wedge. You start pointing out contradictions between what not only he says and believes, but how his beliefs contradict the sources he cites. This disorients your opponent, and when you do this for an extended period of time, you have psychically frozen him in place. He is bound in by each wedge, and his total range of action around you is limited. He becomes an insect caught in a spider's web, and like the main character from a Fallout game, you can hit him anywhere you like. The blows are best couched as humor. Humor as weapon. How can humor be used as a weapon? The goal then is, especially with people more powerful than yourself, engage in attacks that fall below the level of escalation. For example, we have the concept of fighting words, which, if uttered, gives your interlocutor grounds to hit you back. This is to be avoided, as this is psychological, not physical warfare. The best way to do this is with humor. You start joking with your interlocutor in a jovial way on some slight matter. For example, imagine a scenario which he is forced to laugh at himself by all of his friends. This is safe. He can laugh and not feel vulnerable. You try this on him mano a mano. If he laughs and nothing happens, you keep pressing. Constantly observant to any sign, he will escalate. If done correctly, you will be able to viciously attack him in his faults with all with a chuckle and a smile, and he will not be able to do anything, as a violation of the rules of brotherly ribbing is too strong for him to break. As Tolkien said of Gollum, even someone as wicked as that creature struggled greatly in breaking the rules of riddling. Once you have worked over this guy with your proverbial baseball bat, you then can find the very limits of ribbing. From experience, men never truly accept the rules and limits of ribbing and always seek to strike a low blow, so to speak, so he will have no real grounds on which to object. Once you have all the wedges in place and he is all tied up in knots, you unleash that one savage, irresistible blow, delivered with the airiest tones and jovial smiles, that crashes all of his carefully constructed illusions to pieces. The result is quite amusing. He will fold like a deck chair and give you that look, what was that for, when he knows exactly what it was for. What he is really asking is, why did you hit so hard? The reality is action economy. This is not a game. This is war. You don't have the time to partake in endless repartee. Time is money, they say. Also, endless repartee is an energy sink. You just don't have time for thermodynamically unsustainable actions. If he gets mad after all you say, you can say it was a joke, and with a wave of your hand, drive in the knife deeper. He knows you won, and he cannot strike out at you at all. He cannot break the fundamental rules of humor, and he has just been eviscerated, still holding his proverbial hands over his proverbial guts. The ambush, closely tied to humor as a weapon. The ambush is a carefully staged attack when your opponent least expects it. Let me set the stage. Imagine you and your interlocutor are in a heated debate, and you imprudently let your words exceed your reason. In affirming more than you can prove, you leave yourself open to the riposte of, "You're wrong, don't deny it, I'm right." Seeing as you are trying to maintain the moral high ground, you admit that you overreached and concede the point. But your opponent isn't done yet. He savors the moment. He's getting heady, sipping the cup that turns demons' heads like wormwood. He keeps going. Here we must take a break and explain something else. In the past, people were conditioned to behave and learn to act by reading books or observing other people act. Today, everybody consumes moving pictures to such a point that people's actions are imitations of films, TV shows, and video games they watch. In a heated debate, when one side falters, it is often seen as grounds for a total rout, in which the interlocutor must keep pushing, pressing, and attacking to get the enemy to fold. This elementary mistake is to only focus on verbal cues. For example, the failure to distinguish the verbal cue of genuine concession of a point to maintain the moral high ground to the verbal cues of someone frightened for being caught in the act and fleeing. This is a most unfortunate error for someone dealing with an elite mind. Back to the story. Your patience is quickly drained. You realize this guy is a sore winner, not able to take the W and leave. No, he just has to keep pushing. He thinks your concession of 1 point is a concession that all of your points and all of your worldview is wrong. That is not so. You pivot, you go back on the offensive, making this about the errors of his thought. This might go back and forth for some unspecified amount of time, and then due to exhaustion, you both break off. You cannot let him get away with this transgression. You think about where you went wrong and formulate a new argument to hit his beliefs right where it hurts the most. You, of course, do not tell him that, like a samurai learning a new move to defeat your opponent. You then see him walking down the hallway with a friend chatting. You nonchalantly walk up to him, only briefly interrupting the conversation, and you in the most amiable and jovial tone deliver the punch you attempted the day before. Caught completely off guard, you hear an audible, or maybe it's a spiritual groan, as he reels from the blow. At this point, he may never talk to you again. This is the clutch deliverance of what the snipers boast of, 1 shot, 1 kill. Clearly, this operation is to be used on those especially troublesome persons who refuse to leave your life, but won't leave you alone. Mindset. As we play on our opponent's feelings, you must master the art of feeling yourself. You must psych yourself up. Let's discuss what I call the Rooster Cogburn principle. Your goal is to make your opponent only see the struggle in terms of one mind versus one mind. In the 2011 Coen Brothers film True Grit, Rooster says, "It's true enough. You go for a man hard enough and fast enough, and he don't have time to think about how many is with him. He thinks about himself and how he may get clear of the wrath that is about to sit down on him." In the modern world, solo fights might be hard to perform, especially in public settings. Mastering the Rooster Cogburn principle will frighten everyone in the room. There is no longer you versus a group of 12. There is just 12 yous for the 12 of them. You've won the fight before it even began. The forlorn hope mindset. Why do kamikaze pilots and suicide bombers have such a psychological impact beyond their technical efficacy? Because in the poker game that is life, it is a race few can match. In both the Pacific Theater and World War II and Iraq, the USMC prides itself on sacrifice. This is in reality a simulation of sacrifice. When one says one is willing to pay the sacrifice of war, one is saying that one is willing to die. The next step is saying that one wishes to die. In this jump, the American falters. Life is too sweet for him, the American dream and all. A man who is not only afraid to die, but embraces death frightens him. It is a means to an end. Furthermore, it is a leveler. A much more diminutive man or even a child can take down a bruiser in this way. It is frightening. Transitioning to the psychological war, when you engage in fighting with someone and they belittle you and make you feel small, in order to get at you and say things like you're a loser, you were playing to lose, or are trying to lose on purpose, you with a grin say the one thing they didn't expect, yes. You have to have the kamikaze mindset when you say yes, but when you do, you can see the fear in his eyes as they stagger back, and the pent-up forces you were holding back under his verbal blows is unleashed like a torrent, like a dam bursting and sweeping away a suburb beneath it. Victory is achieved in that moment when you shout with all your might that the death was preferable to the living death you were tormented with, and that you would take this tormentor with you. If you master the Rooster Cogburn principle, he has no time to think. He only screams inside and runs. Before this point, he might say, "Oh, you're crazy, get away from me." And you say, "Yes, I am crazy, and I'm going to tear you limb from limb." These literary descriptions are not to be taken literally in all cases, as the key principle is to master the look. The look that encapsulates the meaning without saying a word. This procedure can be repeated again and again for interesting observations. The look. I've spent time talking about getting into a mindset or saying the right things. These are just preliminaries for the most effective form of subtle communication, the look. If we envision Arlie Ermy running his mouth off to run down the new recruits, a simple picture of his face with the look tells us all we need to know. You don't have to read the script of Full Metal Jacket or watch it, you just know. The key to making the look work is being convincing. The highest achievement in the look is sincerity. Is intensity and sincerity. Actors can be intense and carry the day that way, but a trained observer can notice a lack of sincerity and realize this person is putting on an act or in social life lying. If you can master the art of sincerity, you will never be outbluffed. The sincere kamikaze pilot flying into your cruiser is not something you can reason or engage with. You cannot talk him down. This is why meekness is so important. The alignment with the good is essential for being sincere. Sincerity is simply this. And one's motives are aligned with one's words and deeds. Hard enough in most times, but especially hard today. What makes the look even better is as you did not say anything, you leave your opponent to decide what you know and are angry about. You are so convincing he feels you must have something on him and he bolts. Defensive positions are those positions that an elite mind takes in order to prevent his own mind from being hit. This consists in three things: establishing distance, being invisible, and being like water. Crammed together in the biomass incubator we call techno-capital, you oftentimes find yourself cheek by jowl with people you do not wish to be so close to. While increasing spatial distance in this situation might not be possible, it is possible to establish mental distance. The goal is to not only appear to be above it all, but to be above it all. How does one do this? Through a complex set of spiritual disciplines that conditions your mind to not fundamentally relate to the physical world around you, but the higher spiritual world above. When you do this, the physical stimuli increasingly tend to fail to cause a reaction. As the hymn "Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus" says, and the things of earth will go strangely dim. By focusing on the divine, one is able to pull away from earthly things, establish distance, a solid place from which to act, what Soho calls the place where yin and yang have not arrived. This place is also a place of invisibility. Again, quoting Soho, "The enemy does not see me, I do not see the enemy." If the enemy cannot see you, he cannot strike. He cannot even initiate the OODA loop, which begins with observe. Being invisible consists in nothing but this: you exist in just such a way that while everyone sees you, they cannot see anything clear or distinct about you. Let us use a physics analogy. Imagine you see a cube in three-dimensional space. This cube might, in fact, just be a cube and nothing more. Or the cube might be the shadow of a fourth-dimensional hypercube called a tesseract. If you had no knowledge of hyperdimensions, you would be unable to distinguish between the cube and the shadow of the tesseract, except for one thing. While for all practical purposes, the cube and the shadow are the same, careful investigation will prove that the source of the former's existence is in our realm, and the source of the second in some other unknown realm. Most people will never do that, and those that can will likely not be able to do the legwork to get to the objective superposition spoken of earlier. Practically, what does this mean? It means you exist in a space people can observe without really revealing any of your vulnerable points. Your vulnerable points exist in a place that your opponent cannot even conceive of, let alone observe. You are at this point bulletproof. That part of which is physical, which is the shadow of the tesseract, they can in theory be hit, must now be considered. Even by chance, a novice might strike a blow, a beginner luck and all. As at this point, it is no time to slack off and rest on your laurels. You must be like water. As Sun Tzu said, water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. The soldier works out his victory in relation to the foe whom he is facing. Therefore, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. This theme is further expressed by Bruce Lee, who said, "Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend." As Clausewitz said, war is just a very large duel. So it's no surprise that both Master Su and Master Lee applied the same principles to conflicts of vastly different scopes. You want to be everywhere and nowhere. You want your opponent to never know where you are or when you might strike. To invoke the madness of our age, you should be like a shoggoth. Here are two descriptions of a shoggoth from the Mountains of Madness. And had modeled their tough plasticity into various useful temporary limbs and organs, but now their self-molding powers were sometimes exercised independently and in various imitative forms implanted by past suggestion. Formless protoplasm able to mock and reflect all forms and organs and processes, viscous agglutinations of bubbling cells, rubbery 15-foot spheroids, infinitely plastic and ductile, slaves of suggestion, builders of cities, more and more sullen, more and more intelligent, more and more amphibious, more and more imitative. Plastic, formless, able to take any shape one needs. This is the right amount of fear one needs to cultivate while attempting to become water. What has one achieved when one becomes an elite mind of this type? To quote Carlyle, we figure society as a machine, and that mind as opposed to mind as body is to body, whereby 2 or at most 10 little minds must be stronger than one great mind. Notable absurdity. For the plain truth, very plain we think, is that minds are opposed to minds in quite a different way. And one man that has a higher wisdom and heretofore unknown spiritual truth in him is stronger not than 10 men that have it not, or than 10,000, but than all men that have it not, and stands alone among them with quite ethereal angelic power, as with a sword out of heaven's own armory, sky-tempered, which no buckler and no tower of brass will finally withstand. All right, that is our show for today. Let's check out the chat. Middleton Walker, thank you. $20 US. Very much appreciated. Some psychologically manipulative lucre for you, brother. Thanks, much appreciated. Record deepness. You see me now, a veteran of 1,000 psychic wars. That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's the mantra you want to be chanting. Middleton Walker, I didn't have an opportunity to tell you this when I last saw you in the chat, man, but record deepness is a hilarious. Oh, sorry, those to me. Middleton Walker, you have fattened your hearts as in the day of slaughter. These are superlatively foreboding words. What other words could possibly be more haunting when applied to oneself? Exactly. Nicholas DeBari, always be too artistic to let personal slights pass without comment. I mean, there's some truth there. Obsidian Fane, imagine how many more authentic personalities would exist if we did not have the influence of film and television media, and not just manufactured media personalities that are replicating among the wargs. Yeah, exactly. Tying this into the earlier show that I did with the new class, I think this is what happened, is the new class will use this psychological power to just decimate everybody that stands in their way, who is the result of the simulated products of our society. And there's very little anyone can do to stand in their way. So, once they get going, they're going to get going. What else do we got? Caravaggio, Bhagavad Gita, the duty to act without even the remotest guarantee of the results. Yeah, well, I don't know if I would follow that. That seems to be a baddie right there. Let's see. Middleton Walker, I don't know about you guys, but I always keep several four-dimensional hyperkeys in my pocket just in case. Yeah, I know. Just be careful you don't go out like Red Skull. Record deepness, I recall the experience of the crew of Destroyer Lafayette in World War II. They came under attack by over a dozen kamikaze pilots. The men, the guns kept firing until they were hit directly by the planes. I mean, there's something about that that's just kind of intrinsically horrifying, even if it's a strategy or a tactic of a losing empire. It's like, wow, who are you fighting? Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is Todd Lewis, the Praise of Fly podcast, signing off.